Welcome back to Second Breakfast and our ongoing coverage of A Game of Thrones, bringing you the best thoughts, theories, and literary analysis this side of the Godswood.
There you go. Very good. Before we get into anything, just quick, we got to do it. Cam's book came out last week. Yes, it is called Lemon Tarts in Space. It is available as an audio drama or in paperback or ebook form. You can get it via the link down below. It's very funny and very goofy and the perfect holiday gift to yourself or somebody you love.
Yes, it is. And obviously, if you listen to this show, you know we are readers as much as I am a writer. And with that in mind, we wanted to price this book really competitively because I can't tell you how much I hate walking into Barnes & Noble, picking up an interesting paperback and seeing that it's $18 fucking
for a paperback.
Yeah, exactly.
Get out.
So the audiobook, the audio drama price was not as much up to us. You can use like an Audible credit and you can use some Spotify credits and stuff, but the paperback, which is over 200 pages, is $9.99.
Get it, baby. Also,
So,
Cam designed the cover. It looks incredible.
I did everything. Soup to nuts, farm to table. I did the whole fucking thing.
Soup to nuts. I've never heard that one.
I think it's a British thing.
I think you made that one up. If you guys don't know, Cam is full of idioms that I never in my life have heard. I think you were raised by George Bailey or something.
You were raised without idioms.
I was raised with normal idioms from normal time periods.
I'm raised with idioms from the 70s, but you were raised without
No,
them.
yours are not from the 70s. They're from like the 30s. I think your parents were like 80 years old in disguise. It was very strange. Anyway,
it's a fun adventure story. It's a light science fiction, dark comedy. Thank you very much for the response we've gotten. It's been overwhelming in the last week. It's been absolutely incredible. The support means everything to us, not just for this show and the Patreon, all that stuff we talk about every week, but for this project that has meant a lot to me. Thank you very much. The links are all available in the description. We're doing an interview series.
I was going to say, the first one just came out this past Tuesday.
Yes, going
Wednesday. Sorry.
We're going behind the scenes and doing kind of a breakdown of the creative process in the same way we talk about with different works of art. In every other episode, we're doing one interview about the writing process, the recording process, and then the editing process over the next few weeks. And if you just want to see, hey, what's this thing about? We did a 10-minute episode last Tuesday that introduces the story and the book and the history and the influences, and then at the end there's a lovely 2-minute clip that I cherry-picked from the audio drama so you can see what that's all about.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's dive into Bran now.
Yes, this is Bran chapter 6, maybe the first Bran chapter without dreams. But before we get into our thoughts, I have a lot to say about this chapter. Really enjoyed the process of reading this one. Before we get into those thoughts, Maggie, what happened in this chapter? Spoilers for everything in the book and the show.
Let me tell you. I will say, last week we confidently said it was John chapter 6. It was John chapter 7, so sorry about that.
That was completely on me.
It was my fault for trusting Cam. It was a mistake. So when Cam said, this is Bran 6, I was like, are you sure? Are you sure? But no, it is.
She believed me.
It is Bran number 6. I didn't verify. So again, I'm just blindly trusting you. We're going to hope for the best. Anyway, here's what happens.
Marriage.
Right. It's so fun. Okay. Rob is preparing to ride out from Winterfell with his bannermen, all these like different houses that have come to ride off with him. And Bran is not happy about it because once again, his close family members are leaving him for an indefinite amount of time and they keep not coming back. We learn that different houses have been marching down to Winterfell to join him and others are going to meet him on the road. And frustrated and worried, both like worried about his brother, worried that he's leaving, but also frustrated that he can't ride with them. He's still frustrated about his current state or his new state of
that
being.
He'll never be a knight.
Yeah, that he can't walk. He goes off to the Godswood. Hodor carries him there, and Bran wants to pray to the gods to keep his family safe and bring them home. That's kind of his only comfort right now. He's really been leaning in to going to the Godswood and praying. And while he's there, we get a lot of like introspection from Bran. This is one of those chapters where rather than the narrative happening in real time, we have like a narrative happening, but we also get sort of not flashbacks, but just zoom ins into the character's thoughts. I mean, learn what's been happening over the past couple weeks.
Memories, vignettes. We kind of fill in the gaps as he reflects on the time we haven't seen since we last, because we last saw Bran. What was that?
It was a while ago. Yeah. It was when he was attacked in the woods. Anyway, so we learned that they aren't totally sure what's happened to Ned. There are like all these different rumors saying that Ned betrayed betrayed King Robert and escaped. Ned killed King Robert. Ned is in prison. Ned is on the run. Like, nobody knows what's happened to him. They don't know what's happened to Arya or Sansa or even Catelyn. There are rumors that like Catelyn killed Tyrion. Like, nobody knows what's going on. It's a real mess. But they did get Sansa's letter. Remember, Sansa wrote those letters in her last chapter, really bad. And so they got that. And so they're very confused. They're angry at Sansa. She didn't mention Arya at all. They're like, this doesn't make any sense. So Rob's like going to leave and go deal with it.
He crumples up the letter in his fist. He's just pissed when he reads it.
It's pretty tough. But while Bran is praying in the Godswood, Asha shows up. Remember, Asha is the wildling who was one of the group who tried to attack Bran in the last chapter, but they like killed the other guys and like captured Asha. So she's sort of like just a captive of Winterfell. She works in the kitchens and she kind of wanders around wearing chains. So she's there and she tells Bran that Robb is marching the wrong way. Instead of marching south, he should be marching north to go fight off the White Walkers. And I think this is the first time somebody says White Walker. I'm pretty sure. Am I right there? Anyway, this is like, and she describes him as having blue eyes and black hands. And so that's sort of like for the reader, that's our confirmation that that's the thing that Jon was fighting in the last chapter.
Yeah, she draws that connection for the first time.
Yeah, exactly. So after that conversation, Bran ends up having a conversation with Maester Luwin later that day where he expresses frustration that he can't be a knight. And Maester Luwin suggests that Bran could train to become a maester. Like, you don't have to be able to walk to be a maester. You can do all these things. But Bran just kind of is frustrated by that and stresses he wants to learn magic, that the crow in his dream told him that he could fly. 2 days later, Robb finally leaves and he promises to bring Ned back. Rough. It's sorry to tell you guys, it's not gonna happen.
No.
And so after he leaves, Winterfell feels deserted and dead because Robb is gone. All of the houses that had come are all gone, and Bran is just sad and afraid and alone.
It's just Bran and Rickon.
Yeah.
And Maester Luwin.
And like old people and women.
And Hodor.
Yeah, and Hodor. Like
it's tough. So this is the last chapter. The next one, I believe, is Dany.
Yeah, it is.
So that's our next Targaryen checkpoint. Mm-hmm. So this is the end of this chunk of the story. Interesting, because the main thing I took away from this chapter was just a boundless cascade of distillations and echoes of the last couple Stark Kid chapters.
I felt that too, yeah.
And in that way, it does feel like the ultimate distillation of the ideas and progressions we've had across these characters. But it also kind of feels like a finale before we move into some new ideas, and Dany's chapter kind of sets the template for the next chapter of this book.
Totally.
I mean chunk, but I can't say
the
chunk
piece,
and chapter.
Part.
It's hard. It's hard.
Yeah, it's like when we were reading Lord of the Rings and everything was a book within a book, and it was the worst.
So we're talking about distillations. We did this a lot last week, and I think we're paying dividends the more we distill some of these ideas. There's kind of this compounding effect because we're echoing the ideas from Arya's chapter that were then echoed louder in Sansa's chapter, that were then echoed even louder and more explicitly in the Jon chapter.
So it's like a game of telephone.
Exactly, which is another idea that we talked about last week in the way that misinformation keeps slamming into the wall, where they get 50 different accounts of things and can't react to that news. So here we have fourth order effects of some of these ideas that are more and more obfuscated and more distilled. I have 7 examples I want to jump into for that.
All right.
I mean, it's a rapid fire thing.
Yeah, sure.
So the first one, and let me know what you think of these as we go, obviously. The first one is that we get, once again, a passed-over Stark son in isolation, kind of moping with his direwolf.
Yeah.
Which reminds me of Jon in the cell, which reminds me of Sansa in the cell with Jane Poole, who was kind of a friend from home. And there's a lot of this. And obviously Arya's in isolation now, too. But she doesn't have her direwolf anymore.
No. Well, neither does Sansa, but she still has her companion of Jane for a little bit.
I was also reminded of that moment in Sansa's chapter where she hears the sounds of combat and remembers the yard at Winterfell. And the same thing with Jon when they're practicing in the yard at the wall. Here we have Bran hearing kind of the abstracted sounds of combat outside as all of the Bannermen practice. And he has all of these official Stark Bannermen coming to visit. There's the Karstarks and the Boltons and 100 other groups of people who are all technically allies, but they're all armed and dangerous, and we don't know how much we can trust them. That felt like an interesting distillation of how Jon feels about his brothers in the Night's Watch.
Sure.
Where
they're
technically supposed to be his brothers, but we've seen the sort of attempted murder when he wasn't getting along with them at the beginning.
True. I mean, even you get that with Sansa too, and Arya. Like, they're in this place of King's Landing where they're around people who they're supposed to trust, but they're not sure who they can trust, especially Arya, because she's just more privy and smarter than Sansa is about that. So she's constantly wondering who's on my side, who can I trust? Yeah, I like that.
We also, the third one here, we get an instance of single combat where the young Stark proves themselves with or without some wolf assistance. We had that last time where Jon proved himself, kind of got himself out of the doghouse by taking on the White Walker or White or whatever it was with his wolf kind of assisting him. You had Arya in single combat against the stable boy kind of proving herself and elevating, and now we have that here. So
that happened. I didn't mention in the recap. There's a moment where Robb, one of the bannermen, tries to kind of threatens Robb, and Robb sends his wolf after him, and he bites his fingers off. I just didn't mention
the guy's name is Great John Umber, and he draws a sword against Jon in the Great Hall of Winterfell
against Robb.
And Robb just kind of looks to the side and whispers, and his direwolf comes out of nowhere and rips a couple of the guy's fingers off.
It's pretty great.
And that was an interesting kind of distillation echo of Jon against dead Other. In the previous chapter.
Totally. Like, and their limbs and things being ripped off, hands and stuff. So, yeah.
And again, even in the construction, Other and Umber, like they're similar names.
Sure.
We talked about the naming conventions last time with Other and Other, but I think there's a symmetry even going forward here.
I like that too. Even Asha's name reminds me of Other, so yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we're kind of scattering some of these pieces and playing with them in a new context. The fourth one here is we get yet another, I think this is the fourth or the fifth announcement of Robert's death, and more and more scenes, on page, on screen, of characters finding out about Ned's supposed treason and processing this information. We've been hit with these revelations and seen the reactions to this information. And that's usually the kind of thing you cut away from or avoid repetition of in a narrative.
No, but it's cool because we get to see it in all these different ways, like how the information is shared, how it's interpreted. Like, it's different every time depending on where you are and who you're talking to.
It's really incredibly telling and revealing. And it's also kind of unreliable. Like you talked about before, there's more of that telephone game, that swirl of misinformation that we saw at the Wall. So that's another kind of compounding echo of what we saw in Jon's chapter last week. The fifth one is that we get more discussion, more kind of a historical discussion about Northmen going off in different directions and disappearing forever. And this is another one of those compounding distillations, because what we've talked about with this idea of distillation is that something repeats, but it becomes more explicit, and the characters start to pick up on the pattern. And Bran does that really explicitly here, where we have him kind of looking back through his family tree and seeing, hey, Ned's father and brother, they kind of fucked off, and look what happened to them.
Yeah.
And then that happened for Lady's Sansa's direwolf, whose bones have just been delivered back to be buried at Winterfell. The same thing happened with Ned and Sansa and Arya. The same thing happened with Catelyn, and now the same thing is happening with Robb. And this idea, this kind of observation that has been distilled over these 4 chapters, is made even more explicit and distilled even further, kind of given to us as a bumper sticker. We get yet another aphorism. Like we talked about last week, we talked about 2 of these phrases that could be argued to be kind of the moral of the story, if you remember that discussion. One of them was the gods are cruel.
That's right, yeah.
Yes.
I was trying to remember what they were last week. There was that. There was a second one, too. Do you remember what it was?
The things we love destroy us every time.
That's right.
Thank you for vamping while I was skimming my notes desperately.
I could see you
there.
Desperately searching.
That was very good. We get another one here, which I think breaks down this idea in a really beautiful, bite-sized way. And this one is, no one ever comes back.
Oh, nice.
And I really like this because it feels like, it doesn't feel like a new idea. It feels like kind of a reframing of that old idea. I think, and I'm going to repeat them just to kind of keep them in our heads here.
Okay.
No one ever comes back. I think that is a sharper evolution of the previous aphorism, the gods are cruel. And I think that idea of no one ever comes back is largely borne out. I think it's largely true if we fast forward to what we know of the end of the series from the show. Robb dies, obviously. He doesn't come home. Ned doesn't come home. Catelyn doesn't come home. Bran ends up in Winterfell as, King Bran the Broken. And Arya doesn't come back. She just kind of fucks off to have some new adventures. Sansa's the only one who will ever come back.
I mean, Arya does come back, but temporarily. The same way that
I don't know how
Bran
much
comes
that
back.
counts.
Bran and Jon all come back, but temporarily. They don't come
coming
back to
back
stay.
in the way Bran and Rickon are talking about.
Yeah,
and
and
coming home to Winterfell.
Right, it's not the same anymore. Yeah,
coming back for the scene of a quick battle in the dark isn't quite the same.
Yeah, right. Like they're not coming back to Winterfell because it's Winterfell. That's just where the battle is happening. So they all go there.
It's the last stand.
Yeah.
Sansa's the only one who will ever come back in a meaningful way, but I think she's also the most changed. By the time she gets there, she's not the Sansa who left at all.
No.
So it's not just that this phrase, no one ever comes back. I don't think it's just a kind of testament to future deaths and the larger scattering of the Stark children. I think it's a larger idea that you and I have kind of been nipping at the heels at for a few weeks now. I think this phrase, no one ever comes back, is about the impermanence of identity. I think that's a developing theme over this chunk of the story, kind of demarcated by the Targaryen checkpoints. Look at this kind of quick rapid fire of what's happened to our characters lately. Robb has transformed into Robb the Lord. Mm-hmm. We've seen Bran call him that pretty regularly now.
And really identifying it as a new role for Robb.
Yes. There's a lot of discussion in this chapter of, hey, Rickon's got to grow up and pull his weight already.
He's 4.
He's 4. He's got to start, acting the man.
Have you guys ever met a 4-year-old?
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy.
With a wild dog who's attacking people.
Yeah, right.
Bran, by the end of this chapter, when Robb leaves, becomes the interim Lord of Winterfell. Mm-hmm. Jon, kind of similar to Robb here, where Robb became Robb the Lord. Remember, when everyone hated Jon at the Wall, they started calling him Lord Snow.
Yeah.
And then we saw him join the Brothers of the Night's Watch, and then he wanted to be a steward, and he got to do that for a second, or he wanted to be a ranger, mm-hmm. and then he eventually became this kind of steward and assistant. Arya trained to become this kind of swordsman, mm-hmm. and now she's, undercover with the narrative undead, as we argued a couple weeks ago.
Right.
Catelyn went from this lady of Winterfell and kind of advisor to the Lord of Winterfell to becoming this kind of bannerman, judge, jury, and executioner, dragging Tyrion Lannister to justice.
Yeah,
she's
right.
this detective roaming the countryside.
Yeah, pretty much.
Sansa went from being a daughter who wanted to see the big city to now kind of having to improv being a lady.
Right.
To then being a prisoner, to then being forced into being this negotiator mm-hmm. with all of the North to try to calm these bannermen and avoid this brewing war. Mm. And Ned, of course, went from Lord of Winterfell to Hand of the King to acting king or regent. We saw him on the Iron Throne for a minute there.
Right.
To now becoming a traitor.
Yeah, and prisoner.
Yes, it's this constant evolution, growth, loss, and change. Amidst all of these characters, every time we see them, they've got 2 or 3 new identities that they're being forced into, to the point that some of these characters are already almost unrecognizable.
Yeah, I mean, even did you even talk about Bran? Bran's gone from this young.
Yes, I did.
Oh, sorry, I missed that one. But yeah, now he's this.
I did all
he's
8
Bran
of them.
the Broken. I think I just totally skipped over Bran in my brain. Sorry.
But that's how I want to understand this aphorism of no one ever comes back. Because they're not the person they were when they left.
Right.
It's not just about them dying. It's about this constant volcanic change.
I really like that. I think that's really interesting. Yeah, because everybody does go on such a journey through this story, and it's not that characters aren't consistent, because they are. That these characters are so good, and you always understand why they're doing what they're doing, and there are things about them that never go away. But you're right. Things are never stagnant. They don't ever stay the same. Things are constantly changing in really dramatic ways. I think that's really apt. And that's interesting too, because I was sort of, the thing I was diving into this time was something I dove into last time, which was this idea of childhood. And I think I want to go through that and then maybe combine that with what you've just been saying.
That's
and
great.
See if we can understand it a bit better.
And then I'll do my last 2 distillations after that.
Okay, great. We'll keep us
We're
in
working
suspense.
together this week.
I
this
like
is
that.
Fun.
So last chapter I talked a lot about 2 things with Jon. One was that this idea of Jon constantly being watched, and how that sort of makes him feel powerless and small and weak and uncomfortable and vulnerable, and how he sort of overcomes that, not just by doing the watching, but also by leaning into his childhood, leaning into his childhood memories, his childhood fears, nightmares that he's had. That knowledge and childlike sensibility and perspective is what protected and strengthened him in the last chapter. The key point being he remembers old Nan talking about how fire is like the kryptonite for the walkers, and he's able to attack the walker with fire.
And he was the only one who took them seriously.
Exactly. Taking him seriously. Exactly. And we see the same thing happening here with Bran, but it's a little bit different. We see that theme of watching and being watched quite a lot in this chapter. The most I think for me, the most obvious and one that stood out to me was there's a lot of Bran doing the watching, which is just great Three-Eyed Raven foreshadowing, right? He's the first moment of the chapter, he's sitting up on a tower looking through a spyglass, basically, watching everybody arrive. Talks about how he's sitting on top of, he's on this kind of seat that Hodor carries around. So
it's a basket, I think.
It's like a basket backpack, basically. And so Bran's way up high. And so he's standing over and watching over everybody around him.
On a perch, almost.
Exactly. So and even I think the word perched is used. He's full Three-Eyed Raven mode. So you get that. But you also get Bran being watched, a lot like Jon was. But it's done a little bit differently. You see at one point Bran being uncomfortable with people watching him. When he's going through the Great Hall, being placed in his seat. Robb isn't there for this special dinner, so Bran kind of has to act as the host. And it says Bran could feel the eyes of every stranger in the hall, and it really upsets him. That's where he first hears them call him broken, so he thinks, am I just Bran the Broken? And he gets all upset about that. It does inspire the conversation he then has with Maester Luwin about learning magic and becoming a maester, so that's an interesting trajectory for him. But more interestingly, the majority of the times that Bran is being watched here, it doesn't have a negative effect on him. We see that the writers give Bran a queer look as they walk by, but it says Bran refused to let it trouble him. Let them mock, Bran thought. And then even more so when he goes into the God's Wood, he's looking at the eyes of the weirwood tree. And it says the deep red eyes carved into the pale trunk still watched him, yet somehow he took comfort from that now. The gods were looking over him. He felt safe in their sight. So being watched is actually giving Bran some strength and some guidance and some comfort. And even more so when he's talking to Asha, they talk about the idea of not being watched by the gods as a bad thing. Asha says, the old gods have no power in the south. The werewoods were all cut down. How can they watch your brother when they have no eyes? So this idea of being watched is a good thing for Bran. There are parts where it does, make him struggle and make him feel small and vulnerable and weak. But for the most part, he finds comfort in it. And so that's sort of the difference between him and Jon, at least in these chapters. But he's leaning mostly into when the gods are helping him feel, when the gods are watching him, that's when he feels the best. Because just like Jon, Bran is also in this chapter battling against his childhood. We see him, like you talked about, how Robb is saying, Rickon's 4, he's got to grow up. And Bran even thinks to himself, it says he wants to be a man as well. It says, if his brother was almost a man grown, so is he. He should have been able to protect himself. In that moment, he's remembering when in the woods, he couldn't defend himself because he's paralyzed. And he said he just sat there like a baby. He uses the word baby. So he's also struggling, like Jon, to feel like a man, to feel like a grown-up, and he's pushing against and rejecting his own childhood. And it says that at one point he never felt so little alone or scared. He did not know how to be a lord. That made me want to cry. It was so sad.
But all of that is it's about how other people see him.
Yeah.
It's still that
exactly.
kind of swirling discussion of perception.
Exactly. And it's there are moments in here when he does lean into his childhood and his childhood memories and his child's perspective that either help him do well, or we know from having seen the rest of this play out that it's going to help him do well. Because I was really taken by how much he's remembering a lot of old Nan stories in here, just like Jon did. And when he's talking to Asha, she's talking about the things beyond the walls, giants, walkers, and children of the forest, thinking about these things that, again, to adults are thought of as fairy tales, things that are no longer exist, but children still believe in them. And Maester Luwin even compares Asha's stories to old Nan's. But it's this conversation that Bran has with Asha, he takes very seriously, and he almost tells Robb, you're going the wrong way, you should march north. I mean, Robb wouldn't listen anyway, we know that. But
Robb's not the one who sees. Bran
right.
is.
And Robb is the one who's pretending to be an adult.
Yeah.
He is playing the part of the Lord. We know he's only 15, and he's, trying to do the right thing. I mean, poor kid, it's not his fault, but he's trying to play the adult. But Bran instead is allowing himself to believe in things like magic. He says to Lewin, I want to learn magic. And Maester Lewin even says, but Bran, no man can teach you magic. But Bran says, the children could, the children of the forest.
Ooh, that's good.
And so it's like this hint that like it doesn't quite happen here, but if you lean into the childhood, the children of the forest, these like childlike fears and stories and beliefs, that is what will help you succeed. Because we know that the way that Bran is going to, achieve enlightenment for his story is that he's going to meet the children of the forest and lean into the magic and become this three-eyed raven. And so I just really liked that as sort of a continuation of the stuff that we saw with Jon and him leaning into his childhood. But so then I guess my question here is based on what you just said about what was the phrase that people never come back, people don't come back.
No one ever comes back.
No one ever comes back. So and now I'm wondering about, because being a child is something everybody starts out with and then it either goes away as you become an adult or you lean back into it. But if your argument here, or not even argument, but the direction your conversation was going is that people are constantly changing, identities are shifting, and you can't stay the same. What do we then do with the childhood thing? Like, is that a part of you that gets to remain? Is that a part of you that evolves? Is it good or bad to hold on to that part? Should you be constantly evolving? Like, that's sort of where my thoughts are going now, and I don't have a good answer.
I think it's about flexibility. We've talked a lot, especially in the Arya chapters, about adaptation and that being the key to survival. Ned being bad at it and him losing, Arya being good at it and her surviving. I think the last chapter was a testament to Jon and his growing power of adaptation, where he can engage that childlike part of himself to remember that knowledge and trust in it in a way that a rational adult probably wouldn't, and that has served him. I think if you threw Robb in the single combat against a White Walker that Jon had in the last chapter, he wouldn't have made it. I think Jon has a bit of that savvy and adaptation that Robb doesn't.
I see.
And I think Bran is almost leaning even farther into that kind of dynamism than either Arya or Jon are so far. There's such an interesting call and response about perception through this entire chapter, because it is so much about sensory observation, where Bran is, it's interesting how Asha kind of falls out of the tree. Like, he kind of shakes the tree looking for answers like the gods would.
Yeah.
He kind of shakes the weirwood tree and Asha falls out and starts talking to him because she sees him. She's watching him before she approaches and starts talking to him.
Yeah, it's true. She takes him by surprise when she arrives. Yeah.
And their conversation is basically her telling her what he should be paying attention to, where he should look.
Watching, yeah.
Instead of looking south at all your human enemies, look north for your inhuman enemies. And even their discussion about the wind, when she says, who sends the wind if not the gods?
Yeah.
It's her giving him a new way of looking at things, and them saying the gods are so imperceptible and they don't speak for themselves, but the wind is kind of whispering.
Yeah.
And the wind seems sad because Robb is going south where there are no weirwood trees, so they can't see him. Like, it's just, it's compounding this discussion of perception. But I loved how Asha kind of literalized that.
I did too.
She becomes the spokesperson for perception, if not for the gods that they're discussing.
Yeah, I didn't remember Asha being so, I don't know, important.
Yeah.
I always thought she was,
feels like an oracle here.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm really interested to keep watching her and keep seeing what she does. Because I remember liking her in the show. She's played by the woman who plays Tonks in Harry Potter, and I always like her. But I didn't remember her being
Tenna?
Yeah, something like that. But how do you know that?
I don't know.
How do you remember these things?
I don't know.
It's crazy. But I like her as this oracular figure, especially because Bran will of course become this oracle when he becomes a three-eyed raven, but you've got to have somebody else there to sort of take that role before he can. And
if we're looking at these echoes through the Stark children, a couple Sansa chapters ago, we talked about her as being this kind of accidental oracle.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So, she and Bran were raised in, they were raised in the same home. Nature and nurture, they were kind of right down the middle. So they have the same instincts. So it's interesting that Bran is hitting on some of these skills that we've admired in Arya, in Jon, in Robb, and in Arya now. It's interesting that all of them, they're all kind of cut from the same cloth. That even though they're really never going to be in the same room or chapter again, we can constantly draw these comparisons. They're such beautifully intricately rendered characters.
They really are. It's pretty amazing to see, some of these qualities that siblings have in common, but they're also all so distinct and different.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I've got 2 more distillations I want to jump into here.
Yes.
So I was reminded of something last time we talked about kind of the fourth wall flirtations. We got into some of that again, and we were brought back to our Tolkien days of Sam kind of begging for more time. And we got a little bit of that with the John chapter. And I was reminded of that again here with Bran's prayer.
Yeah.
Where he was sort of, I didn't get the sense he'd prayed many times because it was more of pleading or begging. It wasn't, I don't know. There was something amateurish and again childlike, like you're talking about.
Yeah, that's how a kid prays,
Yes, and it's heartbreaking, but it felt less polished than I think you hear people like recite a prayer that they've learned at a table or before a meal, where there's a formality to it. There's almost something impersonal to it.
Right.
I thought there was a yearning and an earnestness to Bran's prayer that really spoke to me.
I think especially because he doesn't have any parents right now.
Yes.
He needs like an adult parental guiding figure to like ask things from. Yeah.
He's doing this because his parents are gone. He's talking to his father's gods as a way of connecting with his absent family. It's heartbreaking stuff. But the way we talked about Tolkien being the god of Middle-earth, by that same framework, George R. Martin is sort of the god of this story.
Yeah.
And it almost felt like that prayer was from Bran to George. Like, hey, please let Rob be safe.
Yeah, at first he says, at first he says, please make it so that he doesn't have to leave. Fully change the story. And then he says, and if you can't do that, at least make him come home safe. Like, he's trying to play all these different angles of how the story could go. It's pretty heartbreaking and interesting coming from a character who's going to become this like watcher of the entire story, watcher of Winterfell and not Winterfell, Westeros, being this three-eyed raven.
Totally. Yeah, it's these interesting flirtations. The last distillation I wanted to play with here, you've kind of covered this a little bit, but it was about the way we're interacting with the supernatural. This is kind of evolving from the Osha conversation, where the way we talked about the others in the John chapter, where they were more like rumors. There was the discussion of, we haven't seen White Walkers in, I think it was 8,000 years.
Yeah, a long time.
So there's kind of a real world memory of them. But 8,000 years is a long time.
Yeah, especially when you don't have things like the internet or photography.
Right. There was almost it's almost a faith in these things having existed at that point. It's not like a real world knowledge.
We have
anymore.
no direct evidence. It's just like people saying that it happened, passed down through generations.
Yeah, it's a folkloric knowledge. It is a belief in these things, which is kind of challenged by the meat and potatoes lived experience that everyone has right now. There are no dragons. There are no White Walkers. Why? Because no one has seen them. Because I haven't seen one fly overhead. We see John sort of shift in the last chapter when he does have to fight one. But it's interesting that the explicit plea we get from Osha here, I felt like that is a way of distilling that idea further. Instead of just in the last chapter, hey, the White Walkers are real and they're a threat and they're dangerous. They're not just an omen to kind of, in a cutesy way, to open the story. These are real things that are going to kill you. Her saying, like, you have to turn to your true enemy to the north, the White Walkers, that felt like the most explicit kind of mission statement of the book that we've gotten so far.
I see, yeah.
And I love how that is, we almost get the flirtation of that idea in the last chapter with John talking about the others. And here, we kind of curveball that into a faith in the giants.
I was going to say, the
when
giants
Osha,
are a big part of the conversation.
Yeah, Osha and Bran are talking about Hodor having some giant in him.
Yeah.
And immediately you say, well, giants aren't real. That's kind of Bran's reaction. But the longer she talks about it and he watches Hodor walk on by again, he's like, he is pretty big.
Hold on a second.
So there is that childlike willingness to engage with the supernatural. And that will obviously serve Bran in the long run.
Totally. Yeah. And I think even like you can extend that echo where Asha sort of gives really clear details and specifications about the walkers, saying they have these ice blue eyes, they have black hands, like giving us like a clear indication of what these things are, sort of confirming what we just learned in John's chapter. And I think that's like more explicit than Old Nan ever was. Old Nan talked about the others and the walkers in a more folkloric generalized way.
Ice spiders, the whole thing.
And here Asha gives like more like clear specific like examples, like she's actually seen one in the field, you know. So that continued, that like increasing explicitness is an echo from what we saw in John's chapter, because we actually got to meet one. So I like that.
I have one other idea I want to play with here. This isn't a distillation echo. This is just kind of an idea that hit me like a lightning bolt, and I want to see what you think of it.
Let's do it.
And it's sort of variations on a theme here. I'm thinking about our Tolkien days again. I'm thinking about this God of Middle-earth discussion that we had for a year and a half. And if you cross that with the conversation we had last week with kind of mulling over these aphorisms, one of which was the gods are cruel. If we combine that idea that George R. R. Martin is sort of the master of this world who decides what happens, and then the idea that the gods are cruel in this world versus sort of the optimistic theology of Tolkien's world.
Yeah, right. Like things are meant to happen in a certain way so that it can all work out. Yeah, right.
I was really struck by the way Asha talked about what feels like theology in this world, because I don't get the sense there are 100 active religions in Westeros, and all of them are more or less true, right? How many miracles and proofs do we see of these various faiths? But that the more of them you see validated, the kind of less you believe in any of them.
Yes, right, because it reduces the impact of all the others. Yeah.
And we have this kind of abstracted faith in the supernatural in general.
Right.
That there's a bunch of stuff going on.
Yeah, exactly.
And it doesn't feel like there's, one old guy in the clouds with a beard. Like the God of this world is different than that. It's more, I don't know, refracted.
Yeah.
Right? It's not one hand moving all of this.
Exactly. It's more spread out. I mean, even Asha confirms that. The old gods are not in the south anymore. Versus like the way we think about monotheistic gods now is God is everywhere. It doesn't matter what religion is celebrated where, God is still everywhere. And here it's a little bit more spread out and distilled and less... It's more region specific.
It's more impressionistic. There's a naturalism, there's a poetry to the way the gods are described, whether it's the old gods watching through the trees, through the eyes of these weirwood trees, them communicating through the sadness of the whisper of the rustle of leaves. There is something indirect about them, where the gods of this world, they do take action, but that action is delayed or indirect, or somehow open to interpretation. It's silent. It isn't about language. It isn't about stone tablets, brought down from on high. It's more like the forces of nature. It's a hurricane. It's something, it's something much, much, much more removed than what we're used to when we discuss, like you said, the monotheistic religions. So if we're thinking about all that, that's how we're framing up this kind of loose understanding of the God of Middle-earth as kind of a force of nature. Could the god of Westeros, or the gods of Westeros, however we want to conceptualize it, could that be the White Walkers?
Oh, I see.
Because we talk about them as forces of nature.
At the very least, I would think they're allowing, if not causing, the walkers. But are they actually the gods? I could see it, especially because, like, again, seasons are so important here. They talk like winter, summer, and the walkers are so associated with and almost like synonymous with winter. When you say winter is coming, you also mean all of the scary, dark, supernatural shit that comes with winter. It's not just, it's going to be cold and it's going to be hard to find food. That's not what anybody means when they say winter is coming. They're talking about all of the other shit that comes with winter. And not just the supernatural creatures, but like, I don't know, the darkness of humanity comes out more in winter, and things change and things happen that are bad and not good. Like, that's so central to the way that world works. And so I think that if you want to, like, you can extend that to mean that the gods are part of and in charge of the seasons. And so I think you could say that, that even if the walkers are not the only gods, I think they are gods in a way of being like emblematic of this season that is life-changing for everybody in this land, not just people in the north, not just people beyond the wall. So yeah, I could see that.
There's a vast power to the White Walkers, and I think it feels sort of biblical. It feels like it's on that scale where they are forces of nature. I guess the way you look at them, they could be this like justice or divine punishment in the same way there are various plagues and floods in the Old Testament.
Yes.
The White Walkers are on that scale.
Right. And we've seen, especially in like Fire and Blood, we see things like plagues come about that feel like ordained by or caused by the gods. They talk about the gods are punishing us. We even see, especially in Fire and Blood and, Targaryen House the Dragon stuff, dragons are compared to gods. Dragons are like gods. Like, they're not just creatures. They are so beyond the earthly realm. And I think the walkers you can put in the same category as well. And dragons are, in a sense, forces of nature with the fire thing, but also just in the way that having dragons means you have control and it means you can do whatever you want and you can change the entire political landscape of Westeros if you have dragons, right? So or they can totally destroy an entire civilization, like what happens in Old Valyria. So I think, you're onto something here. I like that a lot.
They also have control over the living and the dead. They can come back from the dead. They have these god-level powers. They have this supernatural element to them.
And we even see, and I don't know if this is canonical in the book sense, but in the show we see the walkers reanimate a dragon. So they have more power over a dragon, which we've seen likened to and described as gods. So
they're
I think
unknowable. They're incomprehensible, but they're also largely all-powerful.
And representative of the larger problems that come with winter in the way that gods are representative of so many things. So I think that's great.
Something to chew
on,
that. I guess, as we move forward.
That's a fun idea.
Yeah, I got a lot out of this chapter. I think he's
cool.
really on fire now. We feel like we're really going.
He's on ice and fire.
There you go. And next time we will get another Dany chapter, our next Targaryen checkpoint.
Heck yeah, I'm excited for that. This has been really fun. Well, let us know what you thought of this chapter, of the ideas we discussed. If you're on YouTube, you can comment below. If you're listening via podcast, you can send us an email, secondbreakfastpod@gmail.com, or you can comment on the Patreon post. We post bonus episodes over on Patreon a couple times a month, but we also send out a post just of our regular episodes to make commenting and community building easier, so you can check that out. And of course, again, Cam's book, Limited Hearts in Space, is available in many, many places. If you click the link down below, it'll take you to all the options. Or just like if you want to just search it, just search Limited Hearts in Space. It'll come up and you'll find it.
Novel and audio drama.
Yes.
Thank you very much again for the support you guys have shown the book and this whole rollout. I've been incredibly excited / nervous about it, and it's been absolutely wonderful. So thank you very much for the support for Lemon Tarts. Thank you very much for listening to this series and, enriching this conversation, the emails we've been getting lately, the comments. It's just fantastic. Thank you very much for listening, and we will see you back here in just a few days with another brand new episode.